protect the Amazon rainforest. Before we get into the topic at hand, I just wanted to welcome you and give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do today. First, for any of you who are, we're all kind of experts or not at Zoom, but just a few housekeeping. If you are not, if you need interpretation, si necesitan interpretación, look at vean el globo
Look at the globe down in the lower part of your screen, and you select with the globe the language that you want to listen to, be it English, Spanish, or Portuguese. And if it's only English, and you don't have to do anything.
There's an interpretation feature at the bottom of the globe. If you need Spanish or Portuguese translation, the Portuguese translation, I think, is in process, so just please bear with us. But just wanted to give you that information first so that you could all understand and hear what we're talking about here. So before we get started, just wanted to give a little bit of context to what we're talking about today. All right, Portuguese interpretation is working, so everything should be good to go. And we are waiting for a few of our speakers at this time. This event is a part of the Global Week of Action for the Amazon. This week is being coordinated with Indigenous peoples across the Amazon, with COICA, the coordinating body of Indigenous peoples of the Amazon, with Amazon Watch, with the Amazon, Global Amazon Assembly, the Pan-Amazon Social Forum, with many allies and organizations and civil society that's also supporting great mobilizations that are happening, that are taking place right at this moment, including the second Indigenous Women's March in Brasilia that is taking place right now. For those who may be following on social media, who may be following APIB, which is the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, or AMIGA, the Indigenous Women's Organization in Brazil, there is a massive march taking place right now. Indigenous peoples and women in particular this week are taking a stand. Over 4,000 women are in Brasilia right now, standing for their rights, for their lives, for their territories. In particular, the women are there to share their vision, which they're saying, reforesting our minds will cure the earth. And women are the ones to do that. They're there to bear witness to the Supreme Court decision, which hopefully will come down today, which will determine, the Marco Temporal vote will determine whether or not Indigenous peoples continue to have rights, demarcation rights to their territories after 1988. This is something that is being debated and discussed at the Supreme Court, or it has been over the last few months, and hopefully a decision will be today. I ask for all of you to be thinking of them, praying for them if in your own way, because they were supposed to have a massive march today. But the supporters of the President Bolsonaro, who has been attacking Indigenous peoples and the Amazon since he took office, they are preventing the women from marching today. So everyone, please have them in your thoughts as as we continue this session and continue this day. In addition, and the women are there to protect their rights, lives, territories, as I mentioned, because the Amazon and all the ecosystems of Brazil, all the territories of Brazil are under threat. The Amazon rainforest is at a tipping point, and it is global scientists, climate scientists have confirmed that deforestation and degradation is at 17%. If it reaches 20%, the Amazon will reach a tipping point of ecological collapse. Already parts of the Amazon are already there. And so to prevent further destruction and ecological collapse of this vital ecosystem for biodiversity, for our climate, for indigenous peoples, and for all of humanity, COICA, the indigenous organization coordinating body of the Amazon, and allies such as Amazon Watch and Stand and Avaz and One Earth have proposed an initiative called Amazon for Life, protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025 to avert the tipping point. This initiative and proposal is being heard right at this moment at the IUCN, the World Conservation Congress. And so our Gregorio Mirabal, who is the general coordinator of COICA, who is one of our panelists, is actually at the IUCN right at this moment to present this proposal. So we're hoping that he can still make it, but we understand that that if he cannot make it, he is representing all of the people of the Amazon rainforest, and all of us here who are concerned about the future of the Amazon, indigenous peoples' rights and territories, and our global climate. So with that, as I mentioned, with the threats to the Amazon and to indigenous peoples and our climate, we see a lot of commitments and pledges being made to meet global climate ambition commitments. We see governments and corporations making pledges and commitments in the lead up to COP26, the Conference of Parties, the Global Climate Conference coming up this November. We see lots of commitments being made for net zero. But we wonder if those commitments are enough, those pledges are enough to really protect the Amazon. That is what we're here to discuss today. And I'm going to just give a brief overview of our speakers and then turn it over to my colleague, Moira Briss. So as I mentioned, my name is Leila Salazar Lopez, and I'm just going to be your moderator for today. And next, we're going to hear from Moira Briss, who is a finance campaign director at Amazon Watch. And she brings over 15 years of human rights and social justice advocacy, campaigning, and field experience to her work here at Amazon Watch to hold the financial industry accountable for its contributions to indigenous rights abuses, Amazon deforestation, and climate change. And she's worked on researching community-based models of alternative economies, advocating for affordable housing, and promoting environmental protection and has spent several years as a human rights observer in Colombia. So without further ado, first I'll just mention all the other panelists, and then we'll turn it over to Moira. So Moira is going to be our first speaker. And then if Gregorio joins us, he will follow. He is the general coordinator of COICA. He is Wacunay Curipaco from Venezuela. And Cacique Chief Nina Wahuniqui is president of the Federation of the Huniqui People of Acre. And then finally, we have our friend and colleague, Jade Begay, who is Dene Tesuque Pueblo of New Mexico, and she is the Climate Justice Campaign Director at the NDN Collective. And she leads a climate justice campaign work at NDN and brings extensive experience working in climate justice, in the climate justice movement, spaces throughout Turtle Island and within Indigenous communities across the globe. She has worked as a multimedia producer, filmmaker, and communications professional, working in nonprofit and Indigenous organizations. And she has a BA in film and video and Master of Arts degree in environmental leadership. And she is also on the board of Amazon Watch. So without further ado, now I will turn it over to my colleague Moira.
Thanks so much, Layla, and thanks to all of you watching and listening today. I'm calling in today from Maloney Territory, the Bay Area in California. And yeah, really pleased to be with all of you because this issue of net zero and how it relates to forests, particularly in places like the Amazon, is going to be bigger and bigger as we get closer and closer to that COP climate conference in November that Layla mentioned. So I'm going to start out with a short introduction about what net zero is, and then explain some of the major pitfalls that we at Amazon Watch see with this paradigm before hopefully passing it on to Gregorio. So first, what is net zero? At its core, net zero is essentially a scientific calculation, right? It's the point at which the amount of greenhouse gas emissions put into the atmosphere by humans is equal to the amount of greenhouse gas emissions taken out of the atmosphere, right? So it sounds simple, but it's become a really big and pretty complicated issue. So net zero is important because it has been adopted across the globe by local and national governments, corporations, and multilateral organizations like the United Nations in various climate commitments that those entities have made. In fact, as part of the 2015 Paris Climate Accords, more than 130 countries committed to net zero emissions by 2050. Hundreds of large and powerful corporations have also made net zero commitments, and so have cities and towns like Berkeley, just down the street from me here in the Bay Area. Though that list of entities making commitments includes some of the corporations most responsible for environmental destruction and climate change, which maybe raises some of the questions you all might have. Right, that includes large energy companies like Dominion, Duke. That includes agribusiness giants like JBS in Brazil or Tyson Foods. That includes financial institutions, including groupings of financial institutions like the Net Zero Banking Alliance, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, and it even includes oil multinationals like Shell and BP. The thing about it is, though, right, many of these companies continue to engage in destructive behavior, including when it comes to the Amazon rainforest and the rights of indigenous peoples there. So a couple of examples of that. JBS, which is the world's largest meat producer, is a flagrant violator of indigenous land rights and routinely sources cattle from places where illegal land grabs and deforestation have taken place in the Brazilian Amazon. Similarly, BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, which is a member of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, has invested over $8.2 billion in companies engaged in deforestation and land conflicts in indigenous territories in the Amazon, according to Amazon Watch research. And it also holds at least $6 billion in debt and $24.2 billion in equities in oil companies that are currently operating in the Amazon rainforest. And those oil companies, both the ones operating in the Amazon and the others I mentioned, like Shell and BP, are still expanding operations. It's not like these net zero commitments have meant that they're stopping oil drilling, right? So this raises a question. What are these companies and countries actually doing when they say they have net zero commitments? And is it actually making a difference for the climate and for communities? So that's where we get to some of the loopholes. So what we've seen is that in practice, many companies use net zero claims in order to appear green while continuing their pattern of ecological destruction, carbon emissions, and rights violations. So we see two categories of net zero pitfalls. So the first is the use of investment in renewables and other green industries to supposedly make up for continued expansion of carbon-intensive activity, like fossil fuel exploration, extraction, or infrastructure. So it's kind of like these corporations saying, see, we're doing some green things over here, so you should just ignore that dirty stuff we're doing over here, right? And the second sort of category is the reliance on unproven carbon capture technologies and or problematic offset schemes. So that's kind of like, don't worry, our continued pollution is getting somehow disappeared, so it's cool, right? And I'm going to talk more about that second piece. So one of the most prominent of those is forest carbon offsetting. And that's one that comes up a lot in the Amazon context. So essentially forest offsets, well, they can work in different ways, but in essence, and as I'll explain, they're basically pay to pollute schemes, right? So companies pay a fee or buy into a pool or what have you for a tract of forested land that supposedly acts as a carbon sink, theoretically absorbing a certain amount of carbon from the air that is equal to which the company emits. And then it can say it has net zero emissions. In practice, this carbon accounting doesn't add up, right? Carbon offset calculations are often reliant on assumptions and projections about emissions that are filled with loopholes and abuses. For example, that claiming that they're protecting a forest that actually was going to be protected anyway, right? And additionally, and very important, using forests as offsets can and often has led to serious issues of environmental injustice and dispossession of indigenous lands, right? So we've seen it's often the case that forest-dwelling indigenous populations, like in the Amazon, are forced into unfavorable agreements or have their land stolen by governments and corporate actors in order to create carbon offset areas for sale. And this is, as our partners IDACEP, the Association of Indigenous Peoples of the Caribbean and Amazon, essentially carbon piracy and a continuation of colonialist land grabbing. So on this webinar, you're going to hear from community members who've been directly affected by some of these net zero loophole offsets. And you're going to hear why we have at Amazon Watch come to call them false solutions for climate justice. And we think that the real solutions are the rapid phase out of emissions from the burning of fossil fuels and other industrial activities, the rapid elimination of commodity production that drives deforestation, and concrete commitments and contributions to rights-based nature protection and restoration led by Indigenous peoples. And with that, I'm going to pass it on. Hopefully Gregorio is here, but Leila, I'll leave it to you to facilitate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moira. Thank you for that overview. I did hear from our colleagues at Cueca, and for those of you who might have joined a little later, our colleague Gregorio Mirabal, who is the general coordinator of Cueca, is actually at this moment in France at the IUCN World Conservation Congress, and in the midst of presenting motion 129, which is the proposal at the IUCN to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2020. So he is not going to be able to make it, unfortunately. We apologize for that. But what we will do instead is share some links and information about the 80 by 25 initiative and how you can support that initiative and that call by Indigenous peoples, by Cueca, by all of the 9, the Indigenous organizations of all the 9 Amazonian countries who are backing this proposal, along with NGO allies and global scientists. And the list is growing. I think over 250 international organizations just in the last week have signed on for this proposal and calling on global governments to make a pact to protect the Amazon. Initially, one of the first things that we are calling for is to declare a state of emergency in the Amazon. because that is what it is. It's in an emergency due to the deforestation. It's in an emergency due to the fires. It's an emergency due to the attacks on Indigenous and human rights defenders, and the list goes on. And so we are calling on the global governments, in particular the 9 Amazonian country governments, to declare a state of emergency. And as in any state of emergency, there needs to be emergency precautions and agreements made, and protections made, which is what we need for the Amazon at this time. So we are also, I'm just seeing if Nina Y has made it. We are still also waiting for Nina Wahuni Queen, who is in Brasilia right now. And so we will now turn it over, if that's okay, we will turn it over to our colleague Jade Begay. If you could share, Jade, your perspectives from, your perspectives on net zero and false solutions in light of the state of our global climate, and in particular the Amazon, and how it relates to Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jade Begay, and I'm the Climate Justice Campaign Director at Andean Collective. I also sit on the board of Amazon Watch, which is a huge honor. And I am so grateful to be able to work in this way and stay connected to our relatives down in the global south, and especially those who are working on the front lines to protect the Amazon forest. I have been building relationship with Leila and with colleagues across the Amazon for a good portion of my career and my engagement and involvement in these issues, and it's just been really an honor to, and a privilege to work in this way where we're, I always come back to this, if you've ever heard me talk about, why it's important to build these relationships. There's cosmology and there's story at the root of all of this, and that's, to fulfill this eagle condor prophecy. So I really do feel that we are doing that, we are building that, we are living that, so that we can win, and so that we can prevail, I suppose, in this moment of great collapse. So yeah, with net zero, when it comes to net zero, we're up here in Turtle Island, we're being very cautious about the ways that these solutions are being branded, rebranded. We're seeing that net zero is yet another false solution, again, just being rebranded. For the past few years, I've worked with various organizations that, we've rejected false solutions such as RED+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and we see net zero as very similar to these types of solutions that we've fought in the past. Yet, as we continue to move down and experience the climate crisis, instead of seeing industry and governments respond to the root cause, they are rebranding these false solutions. So we're staying very cautious, like I said, and we're very concerned about, how these false solutions are essentially sold or marketed to communities, to cities, to governments. I think it can cause a lot of confusion that people are participating in some, new shiny solution, yet it's, like I said, it's just the rebranding of these false solutions that we've been fighting for years and decades even. So I suppose we're in alignment with our relatives down in Brazil and across the Amazon in standing firmly against these false solutions. We want to cut emissions at the source. We want industry to take full responsibility, accountability. In the most recent IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their latest climate report urged and recommended that we rapidly reduce carbon emissions at the source, and so I think that's a really stark recommendation from the scientific community. Of course, this science only affirms what Indigenous communities and peoples across the world have been saying for years. We're grateful to the science. It strengthens our arguments, and it, like I said, it kind of aligns with what we've been saying and what we've been reporting from the front lines of the climate crisis. So yeah, to achieve, staying within that 1.5 Celsius or 2 point, we're now sadly moving closer to the or the 2 degrees Celsius global warming, which is going to be devastating no matter what. 1.5 degrees Celsius is already, it's wreaking havoc, and we're nearing that tipping point as my colleagues have been sharing. So, here in the global, I guess in the north, in the United States, we're asking for our leaders to commit to their bold climate promises. We have an administration that really campaigned and really championed themselves and shared promises with our citizens about bold climate action. And now we're seeing really disappointing steps in the wrong direction, whether that's opening up oil offshore drilling in the Gulf Coast right after a hurricane that devastated people in the Gulf Coast in Louisiana and New York City. So we're seeing that. We're seeing the president be quite silent around issues like the Line 3 pipeline or the Dakota Access Pipeline. And we're seeing fossil fuel subsidies included in our new infrastructure package or infrastructure bill, which is supposed to be, this amazing climate-oriented infrastructure package, and so we're disappointed. I think, just to say it plainly and straightforward, it's frustrating. It's disappointing. We're the impacts of the climate crisis are unavoidable here in the U.S. and across the world. So yeah, we're really honored to join this call to protect 80% of the Amazon forest by 2025. Andean Collective has signed on and endorses and stands alongside in solidarity with our relatives across the Amazon, and we hope to continue to work as we move into this month. Is unique. This month is Climate Week. There's this global action week underway. Indigenous Peoples Day is happening in October. Here in the U.S. and then we're on our way to COP26. So in this moment in time, I think it's really important to be myth busting around false solutions like net zero, It's important to be amplifying, what our solutions really look like, spelling it out, creating public education, public awareness. So I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to, just amplify, this amazing call to action to protect the Amazon forest. And yeah, we're going to continue to work with you all and continue to be supportive, and all the way to COP and beyond. So yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you for inviting us to participate in this Global Week of Action.
Oh, thank you, Jade. There was a question. I'm looking at some questions. There was a question on what is Turtle Island. Would you address that question, just to share and
Sorry, I was on mute. So yeah, thank you for that question. And it's definitely a assumption. I don't mean to make the assumption that everyone knows what that means, but Turtle Island is an Algonquin and Iroquois. It comes from those indigenous cultures here in the so-called United States. So those tribal communities are based, are for the most part based on the East Coast side of the United States, and that term Turtle Island comes from those languages, from those cultures, and it just refers to North America. So the entire body of North America, including Mexico and Canada and all the other islands. So in an effort to decolonize, how we refer to our lands and our territories here in the U.S., we refer to this land that I am on right now as Turtle Island, and of course, there are other terms for the earth, the land, across the many tribes and the many cultures, indigenous cultures here in the U.S. So that's just one term, but it's pretty popular among our people up here. And yeah, so I think if you're finding your way across North America, the best thing to do is ask, how people refer to their lands and territories. But Turtle Island is one way to talk about all of North America.
Thank you, Jade. We also have another question, and we're just going to answer these questions kind of as we go. Oh, was it answered? Oh, I actually, since we're still waiting for some of our speakers, I'm just going to, that might be something actually that, our whole audience would want to hear. So I'm just going to, read off the question from Julie Beer. Thank you for the question. Has the Biden administration shown any interest in protecting the Amazon? Unfortunately, they seem to think it's okay to open large oil leases in the Gulf of Mexico and also a lease in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. Thank you. And Moira's gonna take that question.
Sure. Yeah, and I can expand a little bit more on what I wrote. It's easier to do that when speaking than writing. So just in terms of what I wrote, interestingly, Biden did both in some pre-election debates and then in his very first executive order related to climate after he took office, has talked about the Amazon, and in that executive order called for an Amazon protection plan to be developed by various administration agencies. And so at Amazon Watch, we are directly engaging with those agencies responsible for that. And what we're pushing for is based on work that we did before the election even happened, with allies here in the U.S. and Indigenous partners in the Amazon about what are the sort of core issues that they want to see the U.S. government working on, and positions that the U.S. government is taking as it relates to the Amazon. So I put that link in the to that platform in the Q&A, and I can also drop it in the general chat for everyone to see. And some of those core issues are related to the protection of Indigenous leaders and communities and Earth defenders more broadly, who are every day on the front lines of defending the Amazon and are often threatened, attacked, and even sometimes killed. And Amazon Watch have unfortunately known people who've been killed because of their defense of the Amazon and of Indigenous territories there. And also it involves things like how the U.S. is engaging with governments in the Amazon region, and particularly, the most egregious case being that of Bolsonaro, the current president of Brazil. And so we have some specific recommendations there that you all can read on. And I also just want to note the part of Julie's question about oil leases in the Gulf of Mexico, the National Petroleum Reserve, and Jade might have some things to say about this as well, so I'll pass it on when I'm done. But I think from the Biden administration, we've seen some decent rhetoric on climate, but unfortunately pretty minimal action. And I also just want to lift up the Line 3 pipeline in Minnesota, where the Biden administration has refused to deny a permit to a pipeline that's running through Anishinaabe territory, and was never consulted with the Anishinaabe. So there are many cases where the Biden administration is really failing to live up to its rhetoric. And so obviously we work most closely at Amazon Watch on Amazon issues, and we're pushing hard on that Amazon climate platform, but we know that it's not just about the Amazon, that and we need to be supporting our friends and allies here in Turtle Island as well. But Jade, please add whatever you think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add. Thank you for covering it. I think we're in a unique situation here in the U.S. where as much as we want the Biden administration to be moving really quickly on bold climate action, I do, and I am one of those persons who is advocating for that. At the same time, I'm really hyper aware of the amount of rebuilding that needs to happen within the administration. The Trump administration for the last 4 years did a lot of work to undo regulations and frameworks within the Environmental Protection Agency and the Center for Environmental Quality. So there is a lot of work that needs to happen to strengthen those agencies so that we can better protect environment and better uphold regulations and environmental frameworks. But at the same time, we're here in this code red, that we received this kind of code red warning that we received from the IPCC climate report. So like I said earlier, we're experiencing climate impacts across Turtle Island, and so it's just and we're now nearing the COP26, where we want our administration, our government to really step up and really listen to the demands coming from Indigenous communities. So yeah, we're in this really difficult place where we're trying to rebuild from this really harmful government that was in place for the past 4 years, who really did everything in their power to dismantle the EPA and deregulate, and we're also trying to respond to all of these urgent issues when it comes to the climate. So, we're, NDN Collective is working at all these fronts. We're working within the political system, pressuring Congress members, pressuring our local city officials, pressuring the climate team within the Biden administration itself. And we're also working at the grassroots level to support our communities who are fighting pipelines, who are delaying these infrastructure projects, and making sure that they're safe, that they're protected, while they protect these places, and while we wait for our political leaders, our elected leaders, to take action. And I see that Ninoa is trying to sign on, so I'll pause there.
Thank you both. We'll also share some links, some more links about the 80 by 2025 initiative, because the last few weeks we've just been in preparation for launching this initiative. And I just want to really just support and uplift what Jade just said. Is that we are, this is a moment of rebuilding. This is a moment of restoring, repairing, and reparations, and so, I know that the NDN Collective has a campaign called the Land Back campaign for Indigenous peoples to, for the respect for their land and territories, and for their land to be given back. And this is, when we're talking about our work in the North and South, this is what Indigenous peoples of the Amazon are saying. They want demarcación ya. That means demarcation now. That means we want our land. We want our land titled, recognized, and given back. And what's happening in Brazil right now is a complete opposite of that. It is a taking, it's an extraction, it's another way to take. And that's another, that's one of the things that we're here, that's one of the reasons why we're here today. We don't want any more land taken in the name of false solutions. And if Ninoa is here, he can speak directly to that. Você está? I don't see yet. He's trying to log on, so bear with us, everybody. Thank you all for your patience, and thank you for being here. Yes,
Layla, there's a question.
Sure.
While Nina was signing on, I know you have worked a lot on the 80 by 2025 initiative as well. So there's a question from Ellen about explaining the numbers a little bit, and then also why it's so necessary right now.
The Amazon is in a state of emergency. It's at a tipping point. 20, 25 years ago, we used to say 20 years from now, 50 years from now, and we're there now. We're at that point. We're at the tipping point. And so we don't want it to get worse. If it gets worse, it doesn't just affect the Amazon. It affects all of us. There are no borders in ecosystems, there are no borders in the sky, and we will all be affected for the further destruction of the Amazon. Already 17% of the Amazon has been degraded. And as I was mentioning at the beginning, if it reaches 20%, that is the tipping point of ecological collapse, where the Amazon turns into a savanna. And so we don't want that to happen. So right now it's a critical time. Already, why do we say 80%? Because already 50% of the Amazon is protected. About 30% of that is in indigenous peoples' territories that are titled and demarcated. Another 20% is in protected areas, but those areas are still threatened. They're still threatened. They're still being taken. They're still being burned. They're still being logged. They're still being concession for oil drilling by governments and corporations who are making net zero pledges. So, if 50% is protected now, there needs to be better protection for that 50%. The remaining 30% that's not degraded needs to be permanently protected. So that's how we get to the 80%. 30%, the world right now is, and even at the IUCN Congress, we see governments, corporations, and large NGOs saying, let's protect 30% by 3030. That's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough for the planet. It's not fast enough. And it's definitely not enough for the Amazon. And so we're in a time crunch. We're in a time crunch right now. We don't have 10 years. We have a few years to make global commitments for the Amazon and for our entire planet, really, our entire climate. All right, I'm holding on to see if Ninoa is here.
Layla, while we're waiting for Ninoa, there are a couple more follow-up questions on the 80 by 25 initiative. It's turning into an 80 by 25 initiative webinar, but that's great because it's all connected. And I'll just add before passing it on to you, Layla, that I think right when we were talking about the danger of offsets, part of the point is that it seeks to trade forest protection, usually without involving indigenous peoples in the actual decision making for continued pollution, right? And so it's both not solving the climate crisis and ignoring the rights of indigenous peoples. And the 80 by 25 initiative seeks to do the exact opposite, right? Protect forests for their own sake and put indigenous peoples at the helm. Ellen, but you are the 80 by 25 expert more than I, so I will pass it on to you, Layla. And Ellen was asking a follow-up about sort of the how to implement the initiative, sort of what are the ways to make it real, as it were. And I think similarly, Carla was asking about the solutions, right? How are we making this happen?
Mm-hmm. So I will briefly cover that, but I encourage you to go to the website of the initiative, which Moira shared. And there's a section there called the Declaration, which you can all sign. Individuals, organizations, governments can sign. This is an Indigenous-led solution. As if we think about, if we look at a map, which RISE-G, which is a mapping and scientific organization of the Amazon, if we look at the maps that they show us, the best protected areas of the Amazon are Indigenous peoples' territories. And so that needs to be expanded, and that needs to be respected, and that needs to be invested in. Many times, governments and corporations will say they want to make investments, or even foundations, they want to make investments in forest protection. They know that protecting the Amazon is critical, protecting forests is critical. But investments go back to those governments. They don't go directly to the people. And so in the declaration, one of the requests to global governments is that there be direct investment, there would be direct financing of Indigenous peoples' solutions, Indigenous peoples' life plans, management plans, economic development plans in their own way. And that's one of the critical issues. I'm going to go back to what is the Biden administration doing about this. The Biden administration knows that we have to invest in protecting the Amazon, and has joined together with global corporations to on an initiative called the LEAF Initiative. And this initiative says that they will invest in forest protection. But again, the investments will go to the binational, the local governments or the state governments. They will not go directly to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples organizations or governments. And so that's what we're calling for direct investment in Indigenous peoples' plans, life plans, and initiatives such as this 80 by 25 initiative. That's what it needs. As Gregorio, and I don't want to speak for him, but as he said in the press conference the other day when the initiative was launched, he said, governments and the UN, make financial commitments for national parks. They make financial commitments for protected areas. Why can't there be commitments for Indigenous territories? If we know that 80% of the global biodiversity is in Indigenous territories, if we know that the best protected forests in the Amazon are Indigenous territories, why not invest directly in their forests, in their protection, in their management? That's what we're calling for direct investment. And those global corporations and those banks and those financiers who are financing the destruction, we're saying to stop. Stop this investment in the destruction of the Amazon, in the destruction of our climate. Companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and Chase, these companies are investing directly in the destruction. And that's why we are campaigning and putting pressure on them. And I'm going to invite you, take this moment to invite you to join us tomorrow in our day of action on fires, forests, finance, and our future. And we're doing a day of action to put pressure on those companies, like BlackRock in particular, who's the biggest investor in climate destruction, including in the Amazon, in Amazon crude, in agribusiness. And here in San Francisco, in downtown San Francisco, we are taking action. And online, you can take action as well. So we'll put a link in the chat for the week of action, so you can take action, whether you're in the Bay Area or whether you're wherever you are, you can take action. All right. Well, I'm not seeing Ninawa on. I'm so sorry that we left you all hanging. And okay, he's trying to get in. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a very, I'm sorry for the street sweeping in San Francisco. I don't know if you can hear that, but this is a very crucial day in Brazil. This is, a historic day. It can go on the path to life, or it can be on the path to destruction, what the Supreme Court in Brazil decides today. So Ninawa, as well as many Indigenous leaders, caciques, women in particular, are mobilizing in Brasilia, and the Bolsonaro supporters cannot stop them. So let's just continue to all support from afar, and hope that Ninawa can join us to share some direct words from his people from the state of Acre, who have been facing a lot of these proposals for tropical forest standards, for REDD+ initiatives. And while some will say that it's their benefits, we also have seen many divisions caused by these proposals, and to go back to what I was saying before, we want direct investments, direct support for Indigenous peoples, without any strings attached. Without offsets, without net zero. Cacique.
Hola, Leila.
Hola.
Hello, Leila.
Hi, Leila. I have been fighting with my phone.
With the
No,
telephone
I didn't know where
here.
I was. Everything is
How
okay
are
with you? We are here.
We're in the webinar. There you are. There you are. So, Chief Ninawa, can you share where you are? Share with our public about your experience with these proposals in Acre.
Sí. Bueno.
Yes. As you know, my name is Ninawa.
Bien. Muchas gracias.
Okay, you can. I think you know. My name is Ninawa. I am a leader of the Huanikui people in Acre. I'm also currently the president of the Federation of the Huanikui people. We are about 16,000 people in 104 different villages, and also peoples that are not contacted. Right now, I'm in Rio Branco, in the capital of Acre. My little child was born. He is the future chief. So I have to be on a diet, which is our tradition. I have to be indoors for 7 days. I am thankful to this invite and to be able to share some of our struggles that we have lived, especially with the issue of climate crisis that involves the whole planet. And our experiences from the get-go, since 2010, we've been following directly through social media and publications the attempt of our state's government to reduce degradation and deforestation and the forest fires. As soon as there's a legislation that was implemented in 2010 in our state, and of course we understand all the interest to implement it, but our experience wasn't so good in the beginning, because in the beginning there was a huge division, because some people went to work with the government in the Institute for Climate Change. A lot of people in our community didn't understand credit carbon. So this created a lot of division in our indigenous leaderships. And the government was co-opting some of our indigenous leaderships, giving them posts in the government. So the summary of this, we have not reduced degradation, we have not impacted climate change positively, and all we see in the social media, all the resources that our state government receives for this initiative, up to now, we have no accountability for these resources, the contracts for the REDD plus initiatives. So the corporations don't deal with the communities. Some of them, we have some access to these contracts, and as we read them, we see that people who live there either sign or have to leave. So people who live in the rubber areas, they are threatened with legal action if they continue their subsistence in these areas. But this is even worse in the indigenous communities. The state has taken over our territories. All the negotiations for carbon trade is discussed by the state and offsets. The state has all the monitoring of the indigenous peoples, and the state speaks in the name of indigenous peoples and opens initiatives. They bring in resources from the REDD, and they give the equivalent of 10 to 30,000 reais to the communities. So this has restricted our territories. With this, we see the communities have been used to carry out their subsistence agriculture in their communities, in their territories. Our agriculture does not add to degradation. So we see that the degradation that we see in the area, we see it comes from big ag. And we've been persecuted for small plots of land which we are farming in a sustainable way. So this year, 2021, we had many drastic things happening. Fires, floods, they are caused by climate change. And state government has received a lot of resources and does not reapply them back into the communities, into our territories. There is no investment in education, infrastructure. We can't see it. We can't see it in our state. And now I'd like to add this discussion. The whole world is watching the attempt of bills
recording in progress
that are in the Brazilian Congress in an attempt to remove indigenous and traditional rights in the Amazon and in the whole Amazon, to remove our original rights over the lands, remove rights that have been established in the Constitution since 1988. We've been asking for support against these bills that are bills of death, because they will affect not only indigenous peoples, but also the population of the whole world. the indigenous peoples of Brazil, if these bills pass, they will be submitted to a genocide. We call this a civilized, quote unquote, genocide, because when you remove the indigenous people from their lands, you are killing off their traditions, their spirituality, their means of life. So in Acre, our state, it's not different. There also there's a proposal for a big railroad to take soy all the way to the export ports to export to China. We've been fighting against that. We're fighting against petrol extraction by the National Petrol Agency in the Amazon. And all of these bills that are going through Congress, they all go against, they're all in the countercurrent of fighting climate change. Brazil has commitments with Mercosul and with the European Union. These agreements, they agree to exploit more cattle, more soy, more big ag initiatives. And we're seeing people coming up and grabbing land for these purposes. Now in the state of Acre, we're reaching 40 degrees centigrade, over 90 Fahrenheit. Every day we see truckloads and truckloads of illegal logging. How does this government justify programs like the RDD Plus if they are allowing all of this logging to go on? This is a questioning I bring to you. These are false solutions. They pledge to very beautiful things. I mean, if the projects were actually established and carried out, but the thing is, they write things on paper, but they don't carry through. They don't go through with the plans. They really say they're invested in preservation. But for example, the logging companies are just clearing our land for export. There's also a bill in Congress from a state senator from Acre that wants to end our national parks, our national reservations, like the Chico Mendes Reservation, the Serra de Visor National Reservation. So it's very contradictory, a state that shows itself, presents itself as a model of preservation, but is doing the exact opposite.
Bebe?
Oh,
Congratulations to your baby.
Heard directly from Kasikaninawa. It's a very grave situation in the state of Acre. You know, the impacts of climate change are very clear, right? If it's with the very high temperatures that he mentioned, the deforestation that he mentioned, and you know, the direct impacts of deforestation, you know, supported by the government, which is the same government that is then, you know, proposing these kinds of false solutions. So we know that we're over time, so we want to respect everyone's time and just want to thank you for staying over time to hear directly from Kasikaninawa, and thank you for being flexible with you know, the rearranging of our speakers, considering this is such a critical time, you know. And for you, Kasikaninawa, we want to say we're with you. We're with the Huiniqui people. We're with the indigenous peoples all across Brazil who are mobilizing in Brasilia, with the women who are taking a stand, who are reforesting the mines to cure the earth. So we thank you for being with us during this busy time, and also a very important time for you, Cacique. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you for staying later, and please check out the links that we shared, and about net zero, about the week of action, about the days of action, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much. We're gonna wrap here.